the case might be. Royce just put in, the Crown own the land from high water to low water in this country. They could be stopped as illegal landing. Well, who owns the Crown? So you could turn around and say, yeah, the Crown own it, but we own the Crown.
Well, look, it's illegal entry. We've got laws against illegal aliens, unlawful entry, into a country. They can be arrested. They are arrestable straight away. They are arrestable, but they're not doing it. They're not doing it, and it's and they all seem to come from the same sort of demographics, from like Syria, Libya, Iran, East Africa, that sort of part of the world. Young men as well. So it's a nonsense. It really is. But they're doing it. I just generally believe they're doing it on purpose. They're allowing it in on purpose. I don't think it's the police.
Just put in the chat as well. Where do the life jackets come from?
Well, they'll have to return them, and it's part of the criminal empire's investment.
But they're trying to say they don't use them twice, John. They a lot of them, like the boats, are put into like a pool or whatever, a place where they either get burst or whatever, or incinerated or whatever the case might be. But you think about all them outboard motors and engines and things like that, and all them life jackets. I mean, there must be millions of life jackets.
Well, the thing is, the boat will probably return because you've got the coxswain. Will want to return. He's not going to want to keep being stranded in the UK and then subject to all that sort of procedure either. So he'll take the boat back because there's an investment in the boat. But if you've got 50 people that are paying £2,000 a piece, you've only got to do a few of them runs, and you're not short of £1 million in your pocket or €1 million.
Yeah.
It's and the risk of being caught, there isn't one.
Don't you?
But if that was bales of heroin, it would be an extreme cost. If you're caught, and if it was tobacco, it'd be even more. There's big money in tobacco. A lot of the boats that do the fast ribbing from North Africa into La Linea and Algeciras in Spain now, a lot of them they do it for tobacco because there's more money in it than hash and cannabis. So it's all about the money, but it's organised crime, and the government's complicit in it. The whole thing is so twisted. It's wrong.
The organised crime goes down to our children as well, don't they?
Yeah. They bring kids in, the kids will go missing, and there's big money in children. There's big money in people. Trafficking, yeah. I mean, it's always gone on with lorries.
John, about Migration Compact Treaty.
What's that?
Sophia's put in the chat. Migration Compact Treaty. I don't know what that means. What's that mean?
I've got a clue. I've never heard of it.
Well, that's how I asked Sophie to put something in about the Migration Compact Treaty. I don't know that one myself.
Listen, they could stop it if they wanted. If you go back to the 70s and 80s, they were paranoid about animals bringing over rabies. Do you remember? There was always a thing about rabies. And they were said that northern France has the highest amount of rabies anywhere in the world and everything else. What's happened to rabies? Where's rabies gone? It doesn't seem to exist anymore. It doesn't seem to exist, and I don't think it ever did exist. So, but they went to extreme efforts to stop rabies getting into the UK. You couldn't bring an animal in; it had to be quarantined for 6 months. If it was unlawfully brought in, it was instantly put down. And they searched cars, and customs used to really do a good job. Even when he used to go day tripping over there, he was always stopped by customs. But now, you can drive through 5 European countries and not get stopped, and then come into the UK and not get stopped. It's incredible.
Well, when you talked about the tobacco a little while ago, John, Spear put in, I think he put in the chat a little bit up, where you could go from Hull across to wherever it was, France or wherever it is, wherever they landed in in a Dutch country. Hang on, let me just go back on the chat. Right, so the Dutch dash. So they go from he says the Dutch dash. You can go from Hull to Rotterdam for £40 return.
Yeah, they do a mini cruise. You go from Hull to Amsterdam, and then have a day in Amsterdam and come back and sleep on the boat. Yeah, it's always gets advertised quite a bit. It's like this little mini cruise thing.
That's cheap, isn't it? There's nothing really.
Yeah,
When you think it's more to go by train to London than it does to go to Rotterdam or Amsterdam or wherever.
Yeah, but I think it's if you get on a boat, you can't really smuggle anything in really more than your allowance, and you've got to physically walk up the gangplank and everything else onto a boat. But when you're coming in vehicles, when I was dealing with the Turkish organised crime, it was brought over in containers, and what they would do, they would take the containers through. They wouldn't go to Dover. Dover was just far too busy and too well policed. So they're going to these secondary ports, and the main one was Harwich. And they're going to Harwich because the docks there were mainly worked and managed by Lithuanians. And he said they're basically easy to bribe. They'll let things through because you go to that part of the coast, you've got lots of that Far Eastern Europeans there. And he said, a lot of the security and the management is run by East Europeans and mainly Lithuanians. And he said they're just the easiest people really to bribe and get through. And you're talking tons and tons of heroin and hardly any police to deal with it. And if you do get caught, then it's just extreme bad luck. He said, but when you go there, there'll be 2,000 containers and there'll be one little sniffer dog and 2 police officers. Well, it ain't going to happen. And that's how the heroin comes in.
Well, I've just invited Sophia on to see if she wants to come in, and because she was saying these folks come in via a migration compact treaty, will be paid for the rest of their lives by the taxpayer. They put it into places years and years ago. It was a treaty signed by the Commonwealth countries to allow migration of other countries. So I've invited in Sophie now, so she can explain a little bit more. She's a really, really good, knowledgeable, actual person, John. So I'll let Sophie introduce John. This is Sophie. Sophie, John.
Evening, John. Hi, Alan.
Hi. Hello. Hiya.
Hello, everyone in the chat.
Just tell us a little bit about this treaty, because I see what you put in the chat, Sophie, and I'll just explain it to John. Tell us a little bit more about that. What's your outcome on the migration that's going on at the moment and so on and so forth? You've touched on it a little bit about other countries in the migration, in probably African countries, so forth and so on, and the treaties that have been signed. Because I did actually touch on the constitutions. A lot of the things this country signs up to, we are the first ones to sign up to. We don't adhere to them.
Well, the Migration Compact Treaty, I can't remember what year it was signed, but it was, I think, at least about 10 years ago now. And it's basically people that are coming in through the legal channels. From my understanding of it, they will be paid by the taxpayer for the rest of their lives. So once they've been granted stay here, because obviously they can't work when they're in in no man's land as such, they're being paid, they're being looked after. But once that's all been signed off, and say, for example, they do get a job, we, the taxpayer, from my understanding, these people will be paid for the rest of their lives. Because they are considered a minority, our government, from my understanding, has said that they will be, getting paid for the rest of their lives, regardless of whether or not they're in work. That's basically the Migration Compact Treaty. We've all signed it. All the Commonwealth countries are. And, the only way you can get out of it is to obviously is to repeal it. It can be done. There's no reason why not. A treaty can be unsigned. But this is what we've gone into, and this is all part of the EU legislation. This is what they want to do. This is what's happening right now, but this is as some say, illegal migration because they're not coming in through the proper channels. So, you know, it is.
You want to come back on that, John?
Yeah. What's interesting is that I had a discussion with a load of young offenders the other week, and when just before Starmer got in, Fishy Rishi Sunak was on about bringing in conscription because of the threat coming from Russia, and I said to them, bear in mind, these are all young lads offenders. Not one was what we call like sort of British. They were all children of migrants, and I said, how many of you lot, now you're British citizens, will sign up as conscripts and fight for this land that is now your host? Not one of them said they would. And one guy turned around, his parents were from Iraq, and he said, look, you lot, I said, well, it's nothing to do with me, but he said, you lot have destroyed my country, ruined it. So he said, if you give me a gun, I'll use it against your own people. And that seemed to be the general consensus across the board with them, that they just had no loyalty to this land whatsoever, none. Now, I mean, there was one lad, he was the only one that maybe about third, fourth generation that came over. His family he saw himself as Jamaican. And I said, you know, you're probably more British than me, mate, because my father was from another country. I said, but your father, your mother, your grandfather, they were all from this country, you know, and of course, granted, you know, after that they came over in the Windrush system, but you know, he was like 3 generations here, and he still did not see himself as British, and that, you know, that seems to be like the general opinion of them. They've got absolutely zero loyalty, if not really a lot of loathing for this country.
It's funny you actually say that, because I've heard like the likes of Sikhs or things like that turn around and say, hang on a minute. They said, you know, our kids were born in this country. What we do every Christmas is we celebrate Christmas like Christians. We do all the Christmas tree, we do the presents and everything under the tree there, and we celebrate it because we want to be part of this country. We are, you know, my kids are born in it, we made it our home, so on and so forth. So we want to be a part of it and celebrate it like everybody else. And I think when you accept it, and the difference of accepting it and not accepting it, why would you go to the trouble of trying to come to another country if you can't accept it? I mean, when we go abroad, if we go abroad on holiday, if we go on these day cruises or whatever the case is, we adhere to all their rules and regulations, and we just agree to everything when we go as guests in other people's countries. We adhere to their rules and regulations.
But what we've just heard was this treaty where they're financially looked after, and that will probably include housing as well, and recourse to benefits and everything else that goes with it. But when you said about the Sikhs, and it'd be the same for the Windrush generation, they came here to work.
Yeah.
You know, that's the big difference.
Yeah.
Now, if people are coming here and being told that you can do absolutely F all, we will house you, you know, and a lot of them get housed in the cities. So within the cities, you know, the young people got free transport, you've got 24-hour shops and everything else. And you get a lot of the kids then, they mooch into crime, street crime. And we end up with this subculture, and I'm experiencing it on a daily basis now, where if people always spoke slang, and as a young boys or whatever, they become inarticulate, and your parents would you know, redress you and say, right, don't say ain't, say isn't, don't this, don't that, speak properly, right? So there was a benchmark. So if it went wrong, at least your parents and your grandparents came from that old education standard, some from the Victorian era, where handwriting was good and they spoke proper English. You know, a lot of these kids now, they're coming over, their parents don't speak English, and they're learning their English from the street, and they're talking this roadman dialect. I can't even understand it, right? And I'm no mug, and I'm from London, and I've spent my whole working life in London. I now live outside, but until recently I didn't. I lived in London, worked there, and everything else. And people do the old school. Boys would speak, slang, and especially when you got East and South East London.
It's like almost going full circle to when the kids in the Victorian ages, like something similar, which was based on Oliver, when the street kids were robbing and thieving off the streets, and they used Cockney rhyming slang. The slang was used to confuse the police. It's like the Navajos and people like that were used in the Second World War for codes that they used in the war and so on to try and confuse the Germans and so on and so forth. You had various cryptic codes that were used right across the world in different languages, and they're trying to confuse the enemy.
Yeah.
But they did that in Cockney rhyming slang. It was just to the peelers. They tried to confuse the peelers.
Yeah, but you still had a grounding, in the English language, and you could, if called upon, be articulate and well read. Some of these lads, they're so inarticulate, it's unbelievable. The vocabulary consists of about 10 words. They've got no one to redress them because their parents aren't English, so they don't know any better. So they'll speak their own, whether it's Albanian or whether it's Arabic or whatever, Somali, when they get home. And they've integrated into the street culture, street dealing, everything else, that their education comes from Netflix or from TikTok or whatever. And they've got such a tiny outlook on life that their world actually is a postcode. And, without denigrating them too much, they're thick as shite. And, so many of them are, illiterate to a basic standard. They're illiterate. The handwriting's appalling if they can write. And I think a lot of the white middle classes in this country.
I don't know if you get that label now, John, but you used to get that label in street slang when they used to call you Feds, Babylon, 5-0 and all that.
Yeah, well, you can sort of understand that to a certain degree, but it's got worse. And it really has got worse, and it makes no sense. And one word can mean about 10 different things, depending on the context it's put in. But it's just, so many of these young kids have been in prison, and it's just a subculture now. It's an underclass, and it's frightening. And I think people have no understanding how bad it's got on the streets. We had the best police force in the world. It was a benchmark for the civilized world of how civilizations can be policed effectively without corruption. Okay, we have our case of police corruption, but on the whole, we were an uncorruptible police force we had, and we were safe because we had a copper on every single corner. We were well policed. There was foot patrol, there was night duty patrols, and it was brilliant, right? We were the envy of the world. We are now one of the most poorly policed places on the planet. I mean, even countries like Rwanda and El Salvador have a lower crime rate than we've got now. And we'd have classed them as savages a few years ago. How, society, you're meant to get better, not worse. We've got infinitely worse. And they deliberately ground us down to nothing. 80% of crimes not even investigated. Whereas when I was in the CID, you couldn't write a crime off. You weren't allowed to. If you could solve it, you had to. Now they rely on crime solving themselves through CCTV, audio and video footage. And if they haven't got both present, they don't bother. So they don't do any investigating. So there is no trade crafts. And we're seeing this all the time. We are being failed at the most basic fundamental level. And it's
coming to that, John, Mark Crowley was summoned more or less to some sort of Cobra meeting with Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
Now, on his way back out, he either got a really, really huge dressing down, or something happened in that meeting that he didn't like. Because on his way out, he knocked the microphone from the news reporter and stormed across Whitehall as if he had the raging ump. So he even got a dressing down in that. I don't know if it was a Cobra meeting, but he went to see Keir Starmer, and on his way out, He knocked a
Yeah,
microphone flying.
I've got a theory on that. I think that he's at that meeting. He got told, how things are going to be from now on, and it's contrary to all his belief system, his professionalism, his tradecraft. Everything that he thinks is dear to him, and now to police one of the greatest cities on the planet, and he's just had the rug pulled from under his feet. I think he's had his future told, this is what we're going to be doing from now on, and it's appalled him to the pit of his guts. I think that's what happened at that meeting.
When
That's
you was
why.
in your job, it did the same to your job, didn't they? They did turn around and said, basically, you was getting too successful and you outclassed your predecessor by miles. Basically, you was getting to name people very, very close to home. And basically, your bosses were turning around and saying to you, shut the fuck up. We take everything away from you, your house, your home, your kids, your pension, the fucking lot. Because you was naming people like politicians. And sometimes when they do these operational Roses, Brockhurst, Rose, and you name it, they don't interview you to know or solve the crime. They want to interview you to see who's involved and how high it goes.
Yeah, I think they know how high it goes because Special Branch and the intelligence services will be appraising them when an MP crops up at a certain young male brothel or whatever, and it filters back. But they'll keep that information for blackmail value. But what they can't have is it getting out into the outside world, and that's why when people like me come along, they don't account for us. So when we do what is really expected of us, and we have a bit of a moral backbone, they have to steam straight in and whack us with a big stick. And it's not just me. We've seen it with Lenny Harper. We've seen it with Mike Ville and many others that have really looked behind the veil, and not all as it seems. But it's sad. It's going to get worse, and we've just got to watch this space because this is just the beginning of the race to the bottom, the decline, and it's so
let Sophie
sad.
come back in and say a few things, or say a little bit, and let Sophie come back in and just answer some of the things that you've actually said, and that gives you a chance to have a few mouthfuls of your food. Yeah. Sorry, John.
I'll have to go at 9 because I'm a Sean Atwood show at 9. So
okay, mate. Give him my regards, won't you?
Yeah, I will do. I will do.
Want to do something with Sean again, or we'll have to do something with Sean, John?
Yeah, we will do. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just Sophie, come back in. Sophie, go on. Do you want to add anything to what John's saying?
Well, let me just read you. This is actually from the Migration Compact Treaty, right? This is on page 16, and it comes under Objective 9. The heading is Strengthen the Transitional Response to Smuggling of Migrants, right? Now listen to this. We commit to intensify joint efforts to prevent and counter smuggling of migrants by strengthening capabilities and international cooperation to prevent, investigate, prosecute and penalise the smuggling of migrants in order to end the impunity of smuggling networks. We further commit to ensure that migrants shall not become liable to criminal prosecution for the fact of having been the object of smuggling. Notwithstanding potential prosecution for other violations of national law, we also commit to identify smuggled migrants to protect their human rights, taking in consideration the special needs of women and children, and assisting in particular those migrants subject to smuggling under aggravating circumstances in accordance with international law. Right. To realise this commitment, we will draw from the following actions: promote ratification, accession and implementation of the protocol against the smuggling of migrants by land, sea and air, supplementing the United Nations Convention against Transitional Organised Crime. Go ahead, John.
Right. So, Sophie, so let's break this down. This guy who is a trafficker that speaks to me, and he tells me that these people pay a crime boss 2,000 euros to come over here. Now, we've got to look at the term smuggling. What is a legal definition of smuggling? Because I understand it if we got like years ago when we had the Barbary pirates and the corsairs of the 17th and the 18th century, where they would press gang steal maritime workers, sailors, and and then they would sort of smuggle them out and to use them as cheap labour. But it doesn't seem to be the case here. These people willingly and illegally enter our shores.
Mm-hmm.
And so at what point are they subject to smuggling? Because smuggling, for me, would seem that there's one person that is hiding contraband or whatever. Say if contraband are people for the arguments here, secreting them covertly, concealing them to bring them in for their own ends, for their own gain. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. These people are just paying, an illicit ferryman to get them over here so they can crack on and claim or do whatever they want. I don't know. So are they really victims of smuggling? Well,
according to this, obviously, they're supposed to be promoting and ratifying it, the illegality of smuggling and human trafficking. So if they're allowed to prosecute, then they should be doing so, because it's actually here in this treaty to state that they can do it, and yet they're not. So that obviously tells you, I don't know, but it would suggest to me that there is an agenda, because these people are obviously not being dealt with.
Yeah, and they're not being smuggled either. I think they're the law is saying they are, but I don't think they are. And I'd like to see what proof they have that people are being smuggled and not coming over on their own, volition to, I don't know, illegally, knowing damn well what they're doing.
You should have a look at this document, John. It's quite enlightening.
Yeah. And what it is, it's all down to the law and how fluid the law is. Mm-hmm. And it's arguing that point. So, that's interesting. Thanks for that. But I'm going to have to dash out. I'm going to have to go because I've got to.
I know you're going to have to dash. Before you go, John, I don't know what. Before you quickly go, just going to say this. Spears Pro, I don't know what it means, but John, he says, Alan, has John ever been invited to roll his trousers leg up? So what was the circumstances? If I don't know what that means, is that something in the falls?
To join the Freemasons. To join the Freemasons. Yeah. I mean, there was always sort of a veiled invite, or there'll be a direct invite, but it never came my way. I wasn't. I never had money anyway, and I don't think I was what they wanted. But it did happen. Approaches would get made, not so much to me, but other people. They were always, it was going on all the time. But they thought I was poor, so they didn't really bother me too much. And that was right, I was poor. So.
Yeah, and Leonard's just put in their Freemasons. Anyway, John, I'll let you get off because you're going to do this other thing with Sean.
God bless you.
Sean.
Yeah, we'll do.
Thank you so much for coming on.
No worries. All right, and hopefully
that was Sean so.
He's gone.
He's doing something else. His timekeeping is, as Sue would probably turn around and say, she did say at the top of the show, his timekeeping is absolutely terrible. He'll be late for his own funeral. Kind of that cliche.